Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Amazon Network. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, a man who I haven't seen since we crowned a NASCAR champion back in November. Werme, I don't know where the offseason goes, but we're happy to have you back in the saddle for season 3 of this fine NASCAR betting program.
Man, this is exciting. I know that there's a lot of people that might not be as excited for the Clash, and then you have 2 super speedways. But to be honest, the Clash was a great race for us last year, and I'm hoping to kind of continue this. Hoping to kind of continue the same thing this year for sure.
It is a full-blown grind, and you mentioned the Busch Clash. For those folks new to NASCAR betting, we'll kind of lay out some of the basics, the format of today's show, a little bit shorter, more concise as we ease people in who make the transition from Bet the Board listenership and the football-heavy shows that we do all fall long into NASCAR, which will take us all the way into November with 30-plus races for the regular season. Maybe we'll coax you into an all-star show and everything along those lines. But the Busch Clash this weekend, a quarter-mile LA Coliseum, third straight year we're going to go there for a little bit of racing action. And when you look at the odds, there hasn't exactly been a huge offering by any stretch of the imagination. We have an outright pool, and that seems to be just about it. The first edition, we saw Joey Logano grab the checkered flag, and we know the 22 performs extremely well when he goes into track sight unseen. Last year, you saw Martin Truex kind of kick off his dominant regular season run. That good fortune didn't carry him through the postseason. He was able to grab the checkered flag. But when you look at who finished on the podium each of those 2 years, it's been Kyle Busch and Austin Dillon, not in that exact order. But as you look at the outright market, we know it's tough. We know it's a smaller position. Are there any drivers that you have your eye on, at least early on, for this weekend's event?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with RCR. I think Austin Dillon's kind of been the most consistent driver at this track for 2 years. I think that track history, obviously, very important when it comes to, betting races. But with only 2, it's not a ton of data. So I really do like Austin Dillon. To be that consistent year over year is really important. If you look at the drivers that have won this race in the past, so Joey Logano wins in 2022. He follows it up with a very mediocre performance, finishing outside the top 10. And then you have
Which
Martin
was kind
Truex.
of a microcosm for Joey Logano all of
Absolutely.
2023 from start to finish. So
Yeah, and then you look at Martin Truex Jr., finished, I think, 15th in 2022, then comes back and is kind of the dominant. I don't want to say dominant because I do think that the 41 and Ryan Preece, I think that Bubba Wallace and then 23 were very fast race cars. But I think Martin Truex Jr. was pretty consistent throughout the race. So it's really hard to just take one race, whether it's 2022 or 2023, and say, I prefer either one of those drivers. I think you have to just look at consistency, and Austin Dillon over those last 2 years has been one of the most consistent.
And when you look at the format for the Clash, we'll lay it out as we kind of do, just to kind of indoctrinate new NASCAR viewers who are going to tune in on Sunday night. This is a exhibition race, non-points paying. Don't tell that to sports bettors, though, because the money that we can earn in this particular event just as green as what you're going to try and take home at Daytona, Atlanta, or the first truly bettable race that we'll see on the schedule, Vegas, in early March. 4 25-lap heat races and 2 50-lap last chance races that will set the field for the main event. When we look at the heat races for the starting lineup that'll unfold on Saturday, the field will be split into 3 practice groups. Each group will have 3 sessions. The fastest lap for each competitor in their final practice session will determine the heat race starting lineups. The top 5 from each heat race will advance to the Clash. And NASCAR's made some other adjustments. It's going to be a smaller field with just 23 cars instead of 27. So we'd hope there's less congestion. The only driver, as things stand right now, that we know who will make the main event is Ryan Blaney, because there's a spot reserved for the highest finisher in the point standings last year. So Blaney, by virtue of winning the championship, will get into the main event. We expect a lot of the marquee drivers to be in there. How does the format for this event change the handicapping, knowing that, look, you could bet an outright and your guy might not actually make the main event, but if you're taking a big enough price, I have to think some of that risk exposure and liability is already built in to some of the Chris Werme calculus.
Exactly. You have to actually factor in the variance that's going to happen in these heat races. We had, in 2022, I think we had 5 or 6 cautions in the main event. I don't even want to get into what we had in the heat races. If you go back to 2023, we had 16 cautions.
6.5 hour event to run 150 green flag,
which is incredible. So you have to kind of have the betting fortitude to understand that you're going to have heat races, which are 25 lap shootouts. Then you're going to have the last chance qualifier. And so much is going to happen in those races. You want to make sure that when you're going to make an outright bet, that you're getting paid properly for the risk that you're going to incur throughout those heat races. And it's very difficult at this point in the week to pick 1 or 2 drivers and say, oh, this is the best bet, or I think that there's value here, because who knows? You could be 6 or 7 laps into a heat race. Your driver could be comfortably sitting in the top 3, and then someone gets spun out, or they get spun out, and you find yourself, betting on a driver that's in the last chance qualifier, and you're only getting paid out at 15 to 20 to 1. So I would say at this point, it's important to be reserved and understand that this is a process throughout the week. You're going to definitely have practice. You're going to have the after practice, you're going to have a direct qualifying, and then you're going to go into your heat races. And whenever you have these 25 lap heat races, I think it's super exciting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have much variance when it rolls into betting outright prices and trying to pick the winner for the race.
And what's interesting, when you look at the winners of the 2 previous installments that we've seen for the Clash, I mean, Joey Logano started 4th when he won the race back in 2022. Martin Truex started 2nd. So you at least have the eventual winner starting inside the top 5. And I feel like this is the Austin Dillon podcast, and maybe more than we talk about Austin Dillon for the next 4 or 5 months. But Dillon showed that he was able to pass in each of the 2 editions. I mean, he opened those races in 10th, was able to drive his way through the field, but you do see a lot of bumping and banging. It is the ultimate short track race. And the one thing about this race, more so than we're going to see at a half mile of Bristol, a mile at Dover, and some of the other tracks throughout the course of the year, if you're not first, you're last. I mean, this is basically the mentality that the driver has to take. Now, you don't want to make enemies that could come back to haunt you as the season progresses in a non-points paying race, but these guys are going to go out there and drive the paint off of these machines. So definitely some things to think about, to Worm's point. As we look at the betting markets from top to bottom, we were hoping there were some head-to-head matchups. We were hoping there were some top 3s, top 5s, a very limited offering early in the week. So it's the outright market. And for those folks, like we talked about, who are going to make the transition from football season into NASCAR, sometimes things change. We're going to try and offer up what we see are the best bets throughout the course of the week. But if a driver goes out there, has a poor practice and qualifying session, some of those numbers may drift. And we may find an opportunity to bet that driver again at a more advantageous price. We'll offer up some best bets on race day like we typically did last season as well. Unfortunately, during the playoffs, there wasn't a whole lot of value to be gleaned. And I think we probably had the lowest volume betting card throughout the course of the postseason that we've had doing this for the last 5 to 7 years. So we want to pass along the best way that all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners who are tuning in to Stay Green, whether you're here for the 3rd season or you're here for the first time, to be able to make you money. And again, we reiterate, it is a marathon, not a sprint. When we look at some of the other dynamics in play around this race, Worm, is there anything else worth sharing? We know Toyota and Ford are going to unveil new aero packages, or from an aerodynamic body type. I don't think we're going to get a full inclination of what that means on a quarter-mile track where you don't place a huge emphasis on aero. But what are some of the things that you're going to look for, if there's anything that you can glean from watching this race on Sunday, that you may be able to apply going forward?
Well, it'd be interesting to see if momentum carries over from the end of last season to this season. Ryan Blaney, obviously our champion from 2023, but really nothing out of him until we got to Talladega in the playoffs last year. Will that momentum kind of transfer into this 2023 season? If you look at last year, in 2023, it didn't help Joey Logano. So, but it'll be interesting to see, because I feel like Ryan Blaney is one of those guys that does need confidence. I would say much like Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace really thrives on confidence. And someone like Bubba had a great year last year, in my opinion, making it through the round of 16. And I think he had a great Clash last year. It'll be interesting to see just how momentum affects the start of the season, because, we're starting from scratch. And, guys like Ryan Blaney didn't win a lot of races last year, and they weren't even really and he wasn't really in contention for a lot of races until the very end of the season. So
he peaked when it mattered most. I mean, you kind of saw his trajectory start to inch out. We got a glimpse of what the 12 car could have in Ryan Blaney in the Coke 600, but you didn't see it consistently. And I know we joked about it on one of our postseason podcasts that if there was a stage that's set up for Ryan Blaney, he took full advantage of that and used that momentum to catapult him to an improbable championship run.
I'll tell you what, I think that momentum in this sport is as important as any other sport. You just look at the way that, if you look back at 2020 and Chase Elliott, he was kind of nowhere to be found. He needed to win at Martinsville, and then he went out and started from the rear at Phoenix and was still 2-1. I mean, after practice and qualifying, it was like, what are we doing here? Like, we just need to crown this kid a champion because it's over. So I think that momentum is as valuable in this sport as it is any other. I'll be interested to see if this 12 team can kind of transfer that momentum from the end of last year into the Clash this year. I know it's not a points paying race, but it would be a great start for this 12 team and all the Fords to get off to a great start.
And I know a lot of listeners tuning in going, hey, look, are you guys going to break down the season-long bets, whether they're futures, over-under on win totals, or things of that nature? Yes, we are, but it's not coming on this program. We've landed a tremendous guest. She was so gracious to agree to come on last year to help us preview the season. That Werme, Danielle Trotta, wants to come back on this very fine program. So when we look at Daytona, we'll do a full season preview. We won't cover all of those dynamics, new faces in new places, and all of that sort of thing. We'll touch on some of the major storylines and put a unique gambling spin on it that only Stay Green can. So that's a lot to look forward to. That show will most likely drop right after the Super Bowl as we look to try and head into NASCAR season in full bore with Daytona from Northern Florida on, I think it's the Sunday, February 18th is scheduled for race day there. So a lot to look forward to around these parts with Stay Green. Did want to get your opinion real quick on some betting philosophies, because I know folks often get excited. We deal with it with football bettors all the time. They've been in hibernation for the better part of 5 or 6 months. They get a race on the calendar. They get a football game to bet, and they kind of want to jump in with both feet. Can you share a little bit about your philosophy and the way you go into kind of building some of those race cards and how you put things together in terms of what you do during the off season, the way you provide your postmortem, and then begin to assess how you're going to approach betting NASCAR as early as this weekend with the Clash and be able to ride that momentum throughout the regular season and eventually the postseason as well?
Well, I think the first thing you look at is tracks where you've had success. So when we look back and do postmortems on races, what did we get right and what did we get wrong? We found out a long time ago that when it came to super speedways, we didn't get a whole lot right, or at least we didn't feel like we were in control of what we got right.
Blindfolded, bust out the darts.
Yeah, I think that it's very, very difficult over the long run to look at a super speedway and say, hey, I have an edge here. So I would say the first thing that most people, most amateurs, the biggest mistake they make is having an opinion on super speedways. Now, I'm not saying you can't get it right. What I'm saying is it's very difficult to do over a long period of time. And when you look at NASCAR Twitter, someone's going to have the winner. There's going to be someone that's going to retweet a pick from earlier in the week, and they're going to be excited about a bet that they made. But I'm telling you right now that as someone that does this for a living, it's really hard to consistently make money in these super speedway races. So unfortunately for us, we're going to the Clash, then we're headed to Daytona and Atlanta. So we actually are going to take some time off to be able to sit back and relax. But I don't think that the Clash is going to be a great indication of what's going to happen at Las Vegas. I mean, we're talking about a completely different tire, a completely different aero package that we're going to take to Las Vegas. So I think early in the season, when it comes to betting and your philosophy is sit back and wait. I think it's important to have an opinion, maybe go ahead and write it down or say what you think might happen in the race. But I don't think it's important to get a ton of money in play because we're going to go to Vegas, Phoenix, then Bristol. After those 3 races, we'll have a really good idea of who's going to be good on the 1.5 mile tracks, who's going to be good on short tracks. And then ultimately, when it comes to Bristol, I think it's really important to figure out who's just historically good at this track. In addition to that, man,
are you going to be pouring one out for Auto Club Speedway? Like when we get to the end of February, are you going to be pouring one out? Do you want to do something?
I want to pour one out right now.
In memoriam for one of your favorite tracks, since we're not going to the high.
One of my favorite tracks. It's one of everyone's favorite tracks. I mean, you can run the bottom, 100%. You can run the bottom middle, you can run the middle, you can run the top middle, and you can run the top. I mean, everyone's going to miss this track. Oh, see, Todd, things were going so well, and then you brought up Fontana. But I think it's, early on, let's just see who's got what. There's a few drivers with some new teams. There's new manufacturers paired up with new teams. You don't have to make a prediction early in the season and risk a lot of money because we just don't know. And I don't know either. So it's okay to be wrong early on as long as you don't have a ton of money invested. And then when we get to Texas, we get to Richmond, Martinsville, Texas, Talladega, then maybe we start to understand, hey, here's where some drivers that have value. Here are some guys that maybe are overvalued and we can make money betting against them. But until then, it's just important to see what happens on the track. Your eyeballs won't lie. The tape doesn't lie. So go back and watch races. And ultimately, I think that there's money to be made, but maybe not these first 2 weeks of the season at Atlanta and Talladega and Daytona. Sorry.
It's an interesting dynamic because last year we saw comers and goers. I think we all came into the season with expectations for Team Trackhouse with Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez to be able to ride some of the momentum that we saw in the 2022 season. I don't think any of us anticipated that the 6-car Brad Keselowski and the 17 of Chris Buescher were going to get as hot as they did over the second half of the campaign. And that's the one thing you see with a NASCAR season. In the spring, it's not indicative of how cars are going to run in the summer any more than that's indicative of how cars are going to look in the fall. And the great part about this sport, if you're looking at the big picture betting markets in terms of futures, you can find a lot of the same numbers late in the year in the playoffs when we find these drivers in elimination races, rather than tying up your capital for the better part of 9 months, thinking that you're trying to capture a price tag that won't be available. We'll get into a little bit of some of the season-long stuff. I'm sure we'll have a win total or two that we don't want people to allocate too much of their bankroll to bet. I am glad to see a number of books out here in Vegas and nationally that are offering those markets with a much more extensive driver menu than we've seen in the past. So that gives me a little reason to be optimistic about some of the things that we may see going forward. But a lot of time to unpack all of those things. Like we said, we'll have a full season preview with Danielle Trotta. We'll put some numbers on the storylines. We'll get her take in terms of what she's hearing from her sources much closer to the garage than we are, and really looking forward to it because we know how well received that preview was. And of course, we'll touch on Daytona a little bit. We know that people want to try and take some numbers and bet a little bit to win a lot in that race. There are folks who are successful betting Daytona. A lot more of those folks use some of the math models to try and play percentage plays. That's not necessarily how you and I operate, Chris, on a week-to-week basis, but there are ways to be able to take full advantage. And we look at the schedule. Chris mentioned we'll take a bye week before Atlanta, and we'll come back full bore in early March. We just wanted to get out ahead of it. I do have to ask, though, one of the things that NASCAR has going for them right now. Well, you look like you got a question, so fire away if you got it.
Yeah, no, I also wanted to add something. The more that I think about it is,
sure,
when it comes to these preseason, futures, whether it's to win the Cup championship or it's to win races, we have to take a look at the changes on the schedule when it comes to the playoffs, because playoffs, it's hard enough to win in this sport. It's also very hard to win in a sport when maybe you aren't great as a super speedway racer, or you aren't great as a road course racer. If you look at the playoffs this year, we're going to have 2 super speedway races, one in Atlanta to start it off, and then we're going to have Talladega again in the second round. When it comes to road course races, you're going to have Watkins Glen, and you're also going to have the Charlotte Roval. So all these guys that in the past, or drivers in the past, have just kind of made their way through to whether it's the final 4, the final 8, based on consistency. There's going to be some more wild cards there. You throw Atlanta into that first round as the first race. That's very different than Darlington, where
Yep.
we know the guys that are consistent week in and week out at Darlington. Atlanta's a very difficult race. It's something that I would rather be on the sidelines for. So when it comes to predicting for the entire season, we saw last year Ryan Blaney got hot towards the end of the year, and that's happened in the past. This year, I think it's going to be even harder when you throw in Atlanta and Watkins Glen in that first round of the playoffs. You throw Bristol in there, and man, anyone could make enough mistakes in those two races to not advance, even if they're a guy like Martin Truex Jr., who we saw was dominant in the regular season and then struggled in the playoffs. We could see that the leader of the NASCAR season points maybe not even make it through round 1 of the playoffs if they find trouble at Atlanta, Bristol, and Watkins Glen.
I think you raise an excellent point, because I do think there's a lot more emphasis going to be placed on winning that regular season title now and trying to pick up as many of those playoff points as you can to build a cushion. I mean, we saw how valuable it was to Martin Truex. It was the only thing that kept him afloat when he was knocking on death's door, so to speak, at Bristol, Joey Logano. And we'll get to that in a second, because NASCAR Full Speed did an excellent job showing the ebbs and flows of emotion with Joey Logano, who got himself knocked out of Bristol. But there's no doubt it changes the dynamic quite a bit. And even the end of the regular season, when we don't get Daytona as that final regular season race, we keep Darlington in its traditional slot Labor Day weekend. So it flips some of the dynamic there for drivers that want to try and race their way in, point their way in. And then you have a rare chance to reset because of what we'll have this year with the Olympics. You'll have 2 weeks for drivers to really get away from the sport and get an F1-like summer break, where I'm sure a lot of these teams will be hard at work in the shop, looking to do everything they can to focus their attentions on winning a playoff race. You can follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board, including plenty of Super Bowl coverage. You can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And I mentioned Joey Logano and some of that emotion, Chris. I'm not sure if you've watched the full Netflix series already. I know you had to come away from being the bookworm that you are to try and watch some TV, so I don't know how that fits into the schedule. But I'm hoping that that can grow the popularity of NASCAR. It's not going to have the same sex appeal and cachet as Drive to Survive. Unfortunately, NASCAR races don't go to the same exotic locations like Monaco and Spain and Paris and everywhere else. But I'm through 2 episodes, and I think NASCAR has done a good job of trying to capture the emotion. And to their credit, focused on one of the most polarizing drivers in the sport, Denny Hamlin, at least to kick things off.
I will sit here, and I know we'll get a lot of pushback on social media when I say that Denny Hamlin's the most important driver in NASCAR.
100%.
People are wrong when they argue against it. They're letting their personal bias, kind of chime in. As much, whether you like Denny on the track or not, he's the owner of a team while driving. I understand that's happened before in the past, but he also speaks his mind. I mean, there was a point when he said that he would rather push, a Tyler Reddick or a Bubba Wallace ahead of a teammate. You just don't get that kind of honesty in sports these days. And I don't care who you are. A personality like Denny's, whether you like him or not, it's important that he's there. And when it comes to the longevity of the sport, when it comes to the interest in the future, Denny Hamlin's going to be there. Chase Elliott might not be there. Kyle Larson might not be there. William Byron won't be there. But you know what? Denny Hamlin will be there. I guarantee you. And his voice is going to have a say in the direction of the sport for 10 to 15 or 20 years. So I think it's really important that people understand Denny Hamlin more. Now, I'm not going to hire him to be my chef. I mean, when was the last time Denny Hamlin actually cooked breakfast? It had to be 10 years because he overcooked the pancake terribly.
We're not giving anything away in the show, but I'm pretty sure that Denny just cooked breakfast for his family just because the Netflix camera crew was there. I mean, that's the only reason that I believe he was cooking breakfast that morning.
Absolutely, because this was embarrassing. I mean, he even burnt the spatula. The spatula was like bent and
Look,
put in the corner.
I can't say anything. I don't use a wood spatula anymore to cook because I may or may not have left it in the pot and it doesn't create a great situation, to say the least. So I am much more of the rubberized textured approach in terms of melting handles. But I do encourage folks, whether you're a sports bettor or not, to go ahead and check out that Netflix series. It's called Full Speed. It's 5 episodes. They'll go by quickly. Full disclosure, I'm only through the first 2. I'm going to try and get through it before the season starts, but football tends to get in the way. But it is a worthwhile watch, and I think it's one of the best ways that NASCAR has shown an ability to peel back the curtain and show some of the true personalities behind the drivers. And I got to give Denny a ton of credit. You heard a little bit of that in Actions Detrimental. It was a raw look at what he does as the focal point early on. And I know they get to the other drivers. And the one thing that I've read from some of the comments, if other people that cover the sport, whether it's Jordan Bianchi or Jeff Gluck, they've said it's an honest reflection of all the personalities that are there. I can't comment. You and I aren't in the garage. We don't have close interpersonal relationships, but for those people that cover the sport on a week in, week out basis to say that, that's what you love to see. And that's why Netflix does such an outstanding job in terms of creating household names with all this. The only thing that I'm thinking selfishly is I wish this came out during COVID and maybe NASCAR could have outpaced F1 for some of the popularity that was there. I guess the difference being is NASCAR doesn't offer up the same good-looking 22-year-olds. It's more guys in their late 30s, early 40s.
Exactly.
The families are a little bit different than when you're wheeling and dealing with beautiful Instagram models and everything else trackside and some of the more exotic European destinations. But it should be a lot of fun. We're going to be with you nearly every race and every step of the way to try and make you smarter, more sophisticated NASCAR bettors. And sometimes the best opportunities don't present themselves each and every week at the track. We'll share our content on podcasts that'll typically drop on Thursdays or Fridays throughout the season. We'll share a lot of our best bet information on Sunday when the markets are much more liquid. We've got a couple additional data points, and maybe we'll be a little bit more aggressive, sharing some top 3s, top 5s, some outrights, allow you guys to get a glimpse of the portfolios that we build each and every week that can make you feel like an absolute genius when you don't get those late race cautions. And like it says over Chris's left shoulder, when things stay green, that is typically a step in the right direction for a well-handicapped race. But final words to you, my friend. I didn't want to take up too much time for kind of the introductory kickoff episode for Stay Green Season 3.
I feel like we should change the name of the podcast to Stay Green Unless We Need a Caution. Like in parentheses.
Here's the thing. We typically don't need a caution. I mean, more often than not, if a race stays green, we're going to be in good shape. On the odd occasion, even when we do get that late race caution, what does that benefit us? Twice out of a 36 race sample size that we needed to flip the script because the gambling gods have taken 10 or 12 races away from us and, 8, 9, 10 position hauls that we otherwise would have had.
Yeah. You know what? I try not to sit there and think about those, but I want things to stay green, but unless I need a caution. So I would say that would be a great hat to make, like stay green unless we need a caution, and unless you need a caution too. So I don't know, looking at the Clash, I wish
I was going to say, best
bet.
Is there anything that would even come close to qualifying for a best bet portion?
If I had to look at best bets, and I'm going to look at Superbook, I think that they've done the best job so far this year, inconsistently, of having, outrights. They don't have any matchups at this point. We did make a move on Bubba Wallace earlier in the week. I don't think that price is there. He's sitting there at 20-1. I would stay away from Bubba at 20. What we're looking for at this point is guys that are going to practice well, because that's going to be a direct correlation to where they start in their heat races. And then guys that can just go out there and make passes for the first 25 laps. They don't need longevity to any of these runs. They're just making 25 lap runs. So if they can work their way up in these short runs, which I think is very hard to handicap. If you go back to last year in 2023, if you were to look at what Martin Truex did in the previous year in 2022, you would be less than thrilled. So I would say don't fall too in love with any drivers at this point in the week. There's a few numbers out there. I do think Austin Dillon at that 30-1 price, he's been one guy that's finished in the top 3 both times that they've run here at the Clash. I anticipate that car to continue to move forward and also qualify very well. I would say if there was one car I could circle at that 30-1 price would be Austin Dillon. Otherwise, I can't imagine where a lot of these prices are headed. If you take Martin Truex Jr. at 10-1 and he puts it on the pole, where is he going to go off at? Maybe 8.5 or 9-1.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to go out there and rush and bet favorites. I think that, Austin Dillon's probably the best price on the board. If you do think that Eric Jones and you think that Toyota might have a leg up with this new legacy motorsports team, I don't think that 50-1 on him is a terrible number. But at this point, I'm being very reserved. I only have this Bubba, but in a number that's not available. So I do think that Austin Dillon at 31 is probably the best number that's on the board.
Yeah, you mentioned Legacy, and we'll get a little bit more into them. They've changed some of their drivers in the lineup. Noah Gragson makes the move from Legacy Motorsports over to the 10 car at Stewart Haas. I did read some quotes from the competition director saying, we know where we stand in the pecking order as far as Toyota is concerned. So they've tempered expectations in terms of where Legacy will go. But again, more on that when we do a deep dive for a season preview, talk a little storylines, some drivers to watch, and hopefully identify the names you need to know early in the season to lock up some of that value. Werme, it's good to have NASCAR back. We know it is the longest regular season across major sports. So it feels like we just blinked in early November and we wrapped up at Phoenix and we are right back at it. Want to thank all the guys and girls that tune in each and every week to stay green. We want to continue to try and grow this platform. Our goal is to bring in some of the most influential voices and guests that cover it from a journalist standpoint, maybe get a current driver or two if we can use some of that Chris Werme charm to be able to make that happen. But our goal each and every week is to bring you the most actionable information we can with some of the best, most insightful voices in the space. And all of you loyal listeners out there allow us to do so as the footprint for this show continues to grow. So best of luck with all of your investments at the Busch Clash this weekend. And most importantly, with a small investment on Austin Dillon. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Wait, can you give like your best Super Bowl pick?
Yeah, I have a.
Can you give something? You should give something here.
Werme, Bet the Board does have an NFL podcast. We tend to give out NFL information there.
No shit.
So if you would like to give out a Super Bowl pick here that people can fade before,
I would take the Lions. I like the Lions to win this week or next weekend. Great heartbroken.
Insight.
But
you got your Michigan National Championship. That's good enough for you.
You know what? It's so funny. I'm not going to go on a little tangent, but I'm going to at least speak to this. My wife and her family know me as someone that likes NASCAR, not as someone that likes football. And so the last, 2 months, I have been diehard Lions, diehard Michigan, and they think that I'm.
Did you sprain an ankle? Did you sprain an ankle jumping off the bandwagon? That's all I want to know.
I was gone instantly. Dan Campbell, he's an idiot. I'm gone. Yeah, no, I just it's been hard because I've been so into the Lions and into Michigan, and I thought prior to last weekend or the last 2 weekends that I was a bigger Michigan fan than I was a Lions fan.
Yeah, because you've had nothing to root for 50 years for the Lions.
It's so hard to win in the NFL that I was more into that than I was. I know that Michigan has a good chance of maybe having one loss or undefeated, going in and playing Ohio State and then making it into the final 8 teams or 16 teams next year. How many teams we can have in the
12 teams? As you can tell, Chris is a huge football fan, and this is why he doesn't get full run on our college football podcast, and we bring Brad Powers on instead.
Yeah. So. I got nothing. But I was so excited for the Lions that, very heartbreaking for us Lions fans. Anyway,
by the way, before no, hold on a second. Since you put me on the spot before I sign off, do you want to offer up a pick? And actually, I would say offer a pick for golf. This show won't be live, so that's not going to help. So we're not going to do that because if it wins and nobody can bet it, that's the worst case scenario for our listenership. So do you have anything else you'd like to get off your chest before I officially close up shop?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
All right. So with all that being said, and Werme off his soapbox, best of luck this weekend at the Clash. And with a small investment on Austin Dillon at a price of 30-1 or greater, we'll see you at the window.